I never thought I'd be the one to put my own brother behind bars. But sometimes the truth has a way of forcing your hand in ways you never imagined. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I've been practicing law for over 20 years in Boston. I've defended murderers, white-collar criminals, and everything in between, but nothing prepared me for the day my younger brother David walked into my office with $3 million on the line and a secret that would destroy our family forever. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when David showed up unannounced. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his hands shaking as he clutched a manila folder like it was the only thing keeping him alive. We hadn't been close in years, not since our father's business went under and tore the family apart. But blood is blood, right? That's what I told myself when I let him in. David sat down across from my desk and said the words that should have made me throw him out right then and there. Our Uncle George had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving behind an estate worth over $3 million. The old man had been a real estate investor, bought up properties in the right neighborhoods at the right time, and sat on them for decades. Nobody in the family had been particularly close to him. He was a bitter, lonely man who'd outlived his wife and never had kids. But now he was dead, and according to David, he'd left everything to him. I asked to see the will. David slid the folder across my desk with trembling fingers. The document looked legitimate enough at first glance, properly notarized, witnessed, all the legal language in place. Uncle George's signature was there at the bottom, shaky but recognizable. The will stated clearly that David would inherit the entire estate, with only small amounts set aside for charity. Our other siblings, including me, weren't mentioned at all. Something felt wrong immediately. Uncle George had always been fair, maybe cold, but fair. He wouldn't cut out the rest of the family without reason. I looked at my brother and asked him point blank if this was real. David swore it was, said Uncle George had called him over 6 months before his death, that they'd grown close, that the old man wanted someone who appreciated what he'd built. It was a convenient story, but I wanted to believe him. He was my brother. The rest of the family didn't take it well. My sister Jennifer hired her own lawyer within days. My other brother Robert threatened to contest it immediately. They all knew David had been struggling financially for years, drowning in debt from bad investments and a messier divorce. The timing was too perfect, they said, too convenient. But David insisted, and he begged me to represent him. He said I was the only one he could trust, the only one who would fight for him. I took the case. God help me, I took it. I told myself I was being professional, that every client deserves representation, that blood shouldn't matter in the courtroom. But deep down, I wanted to believe my little brother wasn't capable of something so calculated, so cruel. I started building our defense, gathering documentation, preparing for the inevitable contest for my siblings. The first red flag came when I contacted the witnesses who'd supposedly signed the will. One was a neighbor of Uncle George's, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. When I called her, she confirmed she'd witnessed a document signing at Uncle George's house 6 months ago. Everything checked out. But when I asked for details, she mentioned something strange. She said Uncle George had been in good spirits that day, joking about finally organizing his affairs, and he'd been particularly happy because his favorite nephew had just visited from California. David had never mentioned visiting from California. In fact, David had lived in Boston his entire adult life. When I asked him about it, he got defensive, said Mrs. Patterson was old and confused, mixing up stories. But it gnawed at me. I pushed harder on the details of that day. David's story started having small inconsistencies. First, he said they'd signed the will in the morning, then it was afternoon. He couldn't remember what they'd eaten for lunch, even though he claimed they'd spent hours together. I should have stopped there. A good brother would have confronted him, forced the truth out. But I was already too deep. The case was moving forward, and my professional reputation was on the line. I convinced myself I was overthinking it, that stress was making David's memory fuzzy. I kept building the case, kept preparing for trial. The second red flag was bigger. I requested Uncle George's medical records as part of our due diligence, standard procedure to prove he'd been of sound mind when signing the will. What I found made my blood run cold. 6 months before his death, The exact time David claimed they'd signed the will, Uncle George had been in the hospital. He'd suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak for 3 weeks. He'd been in intensive care, then rehabilitation. There was no possible way he could have signed anything during that period. I confronted David that night at his apartment. I laid out the medical records, demanded an explanation. He broke down immediately, tears streaming down his face, telling me I didn't understand, that he'd been desperate, that he'd lost everything in the divorce, and the debts were crushing him. He admitted he'd forged the will, but he swore it was what Uncle George would have wanted anyway. The old man had always liked him best, he said. He was just making official what should have been true. I was sick to my stomach. My own brother had lied to me, used me, dragged me into a criminal conspiracy. I told him I was withdrawing from the case immediately, that he needed to come clean before this got worse. He begged me not to, said if I backed out now it would make him look guilty, that we could still win this if I just stayed quiet about the medical records. He promised he'd make it right with the family after, share the inheritance, take care of everyone. I couldn't sleep that night. Every principle I'd built my career on was screaming at me to report him, to tell the truth. But he was my brother, the kid I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd looked up to me his entire life. I was paralyzed by the choice between my duty as a lawyer and my love for my family. The decision was taken out of my hands 3 days later. Jennifer's lawyer had done their homework too. They'd found the medical records, filed a motion to dismiss based on fraud, and requested a criminal investigation. The prosecutor's office got involved fast. Forging a will worth millions wasn't something they took lightly. David was arrested within a week. They offered him a deal: plead guilty to fraud and forgery, serve reduced time, pay restitution. He refused. He still thought he could fight it, still thought somehow this could work out. He got a public defender after I officially withdrew, and they went to trial. I had to testify. They called me as a witness, asked me under oath what I knew and when I knew it. I told them everything, every inconsistency, every lie, every moment I'd chosen to look the other way. But here's where David's plan really fell apart, where that one detail he forgot destroyed everything. During the trial, the prosecution brought in a handwriting expert. Standard procedure in forgery cases. The expert analyzed Uncle George's signature on the will, compared it to known genuine signatures from his bank records, property documents, his real will from 10 years earlier. The signature was good, almost perfect actually. David had practiced it, traced it, gotten it down to an art. But there was one thing the expert noticed that David had never considered. Uncle George had arthritis in his later years, severe arthritis that affected how he gripped a pen. Every genuine signature from the last 5 years of his life showed a specific pattern, a slight tremor, a particular way he had to angle his hand to manage the pain. The signature on the forged will didn't have any of those characteristics. It was too smooth, too controlled. The signature of someone whose hands worked perfectly fine. That single detail, something David never thought to research or replicate, proved beyond any doubt that the signature was fake. The handwriting expert testified that there was no possibility Uncle George had signed that document. Combined with the medical records showing he'd been hospitalized and incapacitated at the time, it was an open and shut case. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge wasn't lenient. Forging a will, attempting to steal millions from family members. It showed premeditation and a fundamental lack of morals. David got 8 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed. He'd also have to pay back any legal fees the family had incurred fighting his claim, and he'd be permanently banned from inheriting anything from any family member's estate in the future. I sat in that courtroom and watched my brother's face as they read the verdict. He looked at me with such betrayal, such hatred, like I was the one who'd done this to him. He screamed at me as they led him away, called me a traitor, said I destroyed him for money. But it wasn't about money. It was about the truth, about the law I'd sworn to uphold, about the fact that some lines you just can't uncross. The real will was eventually found in Uncle George's safe deposit box. Turned out he'd left his estate divided equally among all his nieces and nephews, including David. Everyone got about $400,000. David would have been set for life, could have paid off his debts and started over. Instead, he got greedy, thought he could take it all, and ended up with nothing but a prison sentence and a family that wanted nothing to do with him anymore. My mother hasn't spoken to me since the trial. She thinks I should have protected David, should have found a way to help him avoid prison. My sister Jennifer thanks me sometimes, says I did the right thing, but there's distance there now, like she's not quite sure she can trust me either. Robert moved to Florida, and we barely talk. The money got distributed, everyone got their share, but the family fell apart anyway. Uncle George's estate didn't just tear us apart before his death, it finished the job after. I think about that detail often, the arthritis that David never researched, never thought about. It's such a small thing, such a minor oversight in what was otherwise a carefully planned fraud. He'd forged the signature beautifully, found witnesses who could confirm a meeting, even created a plausible story about growing close to Uncle George. But he didn't think about the pain in an old man's hands, didn't consider how suffering changes the way we move, the way we write, the way we leave our mark on the world. That's the thing about lies, though. They require perfection, and human beings aren't perfect. We forget details, overlook small things, assume we've covered every angle, when really we've left a trail of breadcrumbs for anyone paying attention. David thought he was smart enough to pull this off, thought he could outsmart the system, outsmart the family, even outsmart his own brother. But he wasn't smart enough to think about arthritis. I visit him sometimes, not often, maybe twice a year. He's less angry now, more resigned. He talks about what he'll do when he gets out, how he'll rebuild his life. But there's no real plan there, just empty hope. He asked me once if I regretted turning him in. I told him the truth, that I regretted ever taking the case in the first place, that I should have seen through his lies from the beginning. He said I was always self-righteous, always thought I was better than everyone else. Maybe he's right. Maybe choosing the law over family does make me self-righteous. But I can still sleep at night, and I don't think David can say the same. The money I inherited from Uncle George sits in an account I barely touch. It feels dirty somehow, tainted by everything that happened. I've thought about giving it away, donating it to charity, but that feels like running from responsibility. The money isn't the problem. The money was never the problem. It was what people were willing to do for it, the lies they tell, the trust they betray, the families they destroy. I still practice law, still take on difficult cases, still defend people accused of terrible things. But I'm more careful now about who I trust, more aware of the small details that don't add up, more willing to ask hard questions, even when the answers might hurt. That case taught me that everyone is capable of betrayal given the right circumstances. That desperation can turn good people into criminals, and that sometimes the people who need a lawyer the most are the ones who should never have one. David will be out in 5 years if he keeps his head down and maintains good behavior. I don't know if he'll try to contact me, if he'll want some kind of relationship, or if he'll spend the rest of his life hating me. Either way, I'll have to live with the fact that I put my own brother in prison. I'll have to live with knowing that I chose the law over blood, that I value truth over family loyalty. Some days that feels like the right choice. Other days, it feels like the biggest mistake I ever made. But when I think about Uncle George's shaky signature, about the pain in his hands that my brother never bothered to learn about, I know I made the only choice I could. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and it's better to be the one who tells it than the one who tries to hide it. David learned that the hard way. I just hope somewhere, in a prison cell 2 hours north of here, he's finally understanding that some shortcuts aren't worth taking, that some lies are too big to maintain, and that family might forgive a lot of things, but stealing millions from them while they're grieving isn't one of them. The detail David forgot wasn't just about arthritis, or handwriting, or medical records. It was about respect, about understanding the person he was trying to impersonate, about taking the time to really know Uncle George instead of just seeing him as a means to an end. That's what ultimately put him in prison, not the forged signature or the fake witnesses or even my testimony. It was his fundamental lack of care, his assumption that he could fake his way through without doing the work, without paying attention to the details that make us human. In the end, we're all just a collection of those small details, the way we sign our names, the pain we carry, the marks we leave on the world. David tried to erase those details, to create a version of Uncle George that existed only on paper, and the real man, even in death, proved too substantial to be replaced by a forgery. That's the lesson I took from this whole mess, that authenticity matters, that truth has weight, and that no matter how good your lie is, reality will find a way to expose it.